There were a number of good games released in 2014, despite some of the big AAA releases being complete and utter failures. I look at you, Watch Dogs and Assassin's Creed Unity. These are my personal picks. I have to give an honorable mention to Lords of the Fallen. Although I don't believe it deserves a place on any top 5 or top 10 list, I still feel that it's a pretty good game, even though it only captures the combat essence of Dark Souls without understanding the rest, the sense of exploration, of adventure, of horror and dread, which is what characterizes the Dark Souls series. Or just the Souls games in general, including Bloodborne, or I assume it will include Bloodborne as far as, you know, as far as marketing material goes. It's quite similar in terms of those feelings, and I imagine there will be a lot of exploration in that game as well. Before I get into my top 5 games though, I have to mention the most disappointing game and the worst game. Most disappointing, Wildstar. It's not a bad game, I didn't mention this in my review of the game, but I was let down by it. It did have good combat, it still does have good combat, it does have good gameplay, it does have good raid design in terms of the fight difficulty, in terms of what expected of you. I had a lot of fun in the raids, but beyond the gameplay, beyond the combat, the game doesn't have that much to offer. It's really annoying to go into a raid and see just the terrible design from an artistic or story level story. Fuck that, and there's no story in the raids. Which is what sets apart from something like World of Warcraft, where the best raids, the ones that people talk about years down the line, like Karazhan or Ulduar, had story, had good design in them, had memorable bosses that were interesting from a story perspective, lore perspective, and so on. Wildstar does not have that, which is a real shame, as well as a number of other major issues. So I was quite let down by this game. The worst game of the year, Bound by Flame. Without a shadow of a doubt, the worst game that came out in 2014 is Bound by Flame. Buggy, glitchy, unstable, performing badly, horrible balance, horrible story, horrible graphics. So I need to go on. Everything about this game except the music is complete and utter bullshit. There are some interesting concepts, but they're never really developed all that well, and that's infuriating. The game leads you on to believe that there's this grand adventure about to happen, and then it doesn't. It falls flat on its head. There's respawning enemies in zones that are not interesting, and you have to go back over and over and over again to kill them. And unlike a game like Dark Souls or Lords of the Fallen, these enemies are not interesting to fight. They have a lot of HP, the combat design is terrible, the balance is terrible, the boss fights are terrible. Like, everything in this game lets it down. For a game that takes influence from Song of Ice and Fire and Black Company, it takes the piss on what both those series did very well on a story level, and in terms of the feel both those stories were able to give you while reading those book series. Which stands in contrast to number 5, which is the Banner Saga, a game that also takes influence from both Song of Ice and Fire and Black Company, as stated by the developers, and then delivers on the emotions that people felt while reading those books, which is what the developers stated was their goal. Well, they did deliver on that. There's that journey of a military unit, of a military band, in a disaster, pretty much, traveling together, trying to survive against all odds, that you get from Black Company. And there's that icy wasteland that, you know, they got from Song of Ice and Fire, at least in the chapters that are related to Jon Snow or Bran, though Bran is not my favorite character. Also has good gameplay. I like the fact that you have to deal with the morale, you have to deal with food supplies, you have to deal with troop organizations, tactics, strategy, leveling up your warriors. There's a lot to like on in the grand scheme of things in this game. The story is not really great, but I feel it does a good enough job of stringing things along and making it an interesting journey. The characters are okay, but I'm not really impressed by the actual battles of the game. Are not really impressive. The balance of them has some issues, and they're somewhat of a letdown overall, but because of everything else, Banner Saga is at number 5. And number 4 is a game with good battles, but terrible strategic planning, terrible strategic map. and that's Wargame Red Dragon. The battles in this game, the tactical battles, at least on the ground level, and the helicopter level are very, very well done. The core of the game, from Wargame European Escalation, Wargame Airland Battle, that remains intact in Wargame Red Dragon. Where the game falls apart is in terms of aerial combat, like the way jets handle, the way their missiles work, the fact they can't see fucking ground units, even though modern jets do have equipment to actually spot ground units on their own and require spotters on the ground or helicopters to be able to spot units in order for them to attack them, is bad. The ships, the way they handle, how much damage they're able to do, how overpowered they are, just the naval combat in general is also terrible. Mind you, that's the best naval combat I've seen in the game like this, but that's really not saying much about naval combat in strategy games, is it? In general, it's pretty badly done. It's okay, it's passable, but it's still a nightmare to deal with. That said, I like the battles, I like the campaigns a lot, and there's a strong multiplayer community for this game. Though I'm not the multiplayer fan myself, I'm not interested in playing the multiplayer of this game because I prefer single player strategy games. The only game that I play multiplayer in lengthy sessions is Warcraft 3, and that's the kind of style of game that I like for multiplayer strategy games, or StarCraft for instance. But I did like the single player quite a bit. The problem though with the single player campaigns is that they're very scripted, they're very straightforward, and once you figure out exactly how to move your units, how to abuse the AI on a campaign level, which there is none, on a campaign level there is no AI, everything is pretty scripted there on a campaign level. Once you figure out how to, what moves the AI is gonna make, then you can just dominate the AI. I was able to take Japan, all of Japan as Russia in 3 turns. That's not something that should happen. The objective is just to capture 5 airports. I use my helicopter detachments to just overwhelm them and take the airports, land troops, use airborne troops as well. Pretty easy, and that's something that you shouldn't do. There's just so much abuse you can use in the campaign. I hope that for their next war game, that they will learn the lessons of previous games like Airline Battle and Red Dragon and make a better experience. Airline Battle had more dynamic battles on the campaign because AI actually was good on the campaign level there, or decent enough that it made things interesting. Which is a shame really that Wargame doesn't have, that Red Dragon doesn't have that, because the tactical AI, when it's actually balanced against you, when there's a fair fight, can give you a run for its money. It's very difficult to find a game where the AI can beat you fairly. That's the point. Fairly. There's no advantages in terms of accuracy or HP or morale or any bullshit like that in this game. The AI takes the army that it has, goes against you, and it either wins or dies depending on how well it does. And it can be a very serious challenge. It was quite provoking having to deal with the AI in this game, and for that I like it a lot, and that's why it's on number 4. Imagine a strategy game with competent AI that goes against Total War, like every Total War game that's ever been made, which is why I like Wargame Red Dragon a lot, which is why I vastly prefer it versus the Total War series. And number 3, this was a big surprise, not as big as other games certainly, but still a pretty big one. Alien Isolation. When it comes to Creative Assembly, I have some very negative thoughts about the company. I don't like what they've been doing with the Total War series. I don't like their DLC practices. I don't like the way they just basically nickel and dime their consumers. Pre-order exclusive DLC down the line that costs $2 and increases the age rating just if you get that DLC, because they basically want the age rating for the Total War series to stay at 16, P16, whereas with the Blood and Gore DLC it goes to 18. Yeah, well, fuck you, Creative Assembly. That's my personal thoughts with that. And then they turn around and make Alien Isolation, which is one of the best horror games that I've played in my life. And it's jaw-dropping. This is the best Alien game that has ever come out. Even when when you're counting the Alien vs Predator series, this is by far the best game that's ever come out. polished, good graphics on a technical and artistic level, faithful recreation, representation of the universe it's set in, the technology, the design of the areas, very well done on that level for creative assembly. Good AI on the alien, which is surprising. Even though they're using some obvious tricks there, it's still very interesting. It's a compelling challenge. It's an interesting game to play through, and it does give you a feel of dread and horror for the right reasons, as so many people have said. Also, pisses off the American reviewers like IGN or Game Trailers because the AI is too hard. No, scumbags, you're just a bunch of imbeciles who can't play games properly. Fuck you. Alien Isolation is a great game, well designed on every level, and although there are certain things that can certainly be improved, as with every game, I think this one deserves a spot on a top 5 list. Hell, I think for some people, it deserves a spot as their game of the year, if they're not interested in RPGs. Speaking of RPGs, at number 2, it's Dark Souls 2. There's been a lot of criticism, rightfully so, about this game. But at the end of the day, the journey, the combat system, the boss design, the gameplay design is all very compelling in the Dark Souls series. In Dark Souls 2 especially. I like Dark Souls 2 more than Dark Souls 1. I can see the arguments why Dark Souls 1 is a better game. I can understand them very well. But for me, Drang Lake was more compelling to explore than Lord Run. That's not to say there weren't some great moments that far surpass anything that Dark Souls 2 has in Dark Souls 1. Like Anne Orlando is the best zone I've seen in a video game, period. One of the best zones I've seen in any video games. But overall, as a whole package, including the DLC, Dark Souls 2 stands above Dark Souls 1. Also, it's a far better PC port, and that does factor in my decision. Dark Souls 1, even with mods, still has many issues in terms of how it handles on PC, whereas Dark Souls 2 handles a lot better, although I still have to use control mods for Dark Souls 2 as well to make it very playable. But it does work very well, and I'm not annoyed by the control issues in Dark Souls 2 versus Dark Souls 1, where I am annoyed, even with mods, by the control issues. And that's a big thing in a game like Dark Souls, where it does matter how well you can handle the controls. And I do play with the mouse and keyboard. And I have finished both Dark Souls 1 with them and Dark Souls 2 with the mouse and keyboard. On New Game Plus even. Yeah, people saying, oh, it's you should play with the controller. Well, fuck you. I'll play as a true PC gamer with the mouse and keyboard, as every game on PC should be played with. That's my personal stance. And at number 1, this might piss off some people, but I don't really care. And number 1, it's Dragon Age Inquisition.
I'm not your kind, but Kunari or not, I ask you to listen to what's been placed in my heart. I am the will of Our Lady Manifest. I am the herald of Andraste. She sent me to remind you of your sacred duty, a shield against dark magic, knights who will end the breach.
We will not deny Our Lady's will, not anymore.
It's rather shocking, none more so than to myself, rather shocking that I would consider Dragon Age Inquisition the best game that came out in 2014. That doesn't mean that 2014 was a year of bad games or was a year of letdowns, although there are plenty of those. But Dragon Age Inquisition has a very compelling story, a compelling protagonist, the best BioWare has ever done in terms of story, characters, companions. Although the antagonist is not the best, like someone like Saren is far better than Corypheus as an example, or Master Lee in Jade Empire, far better antagonist. But overall, as an overall package, the protagonist, the companions, the gameplay, the best I've seen in a BioWare game. The graphics, really well done. I know some people dislike it on an artistic level, but they did a better job, although they can improve that, in terms of the armor design, the environmental design, all of that, than in previous BioWare games. Are there annoyances? Yes, there's too many zones with just too much filler content, though there is a purpose to that. The point is the filler content is there to have something to do between discussing things with your companions, doing their missions, doing all the war table stuff, all of the war table stuff. And there's a lot of compelling stories on the war table, very interesting stories, and you do have a lot of choices, and there's not meaningful consequences, but there's plenty of consequences depending on the choices you've made. There's a very, very lengthy quest chain on the war table that you only get if you make a certain decision in one of your companion quests, and if you don't make that decision, allying the Qunari, then you don't get that quest chain to begin with, and you might not even get very far in that quest chain depending on your choices. So that's very interesting to see something like that, text-based as it may be, but still very, very interesting what they were able to pull off with the war table. There's problems with that. Some missions, many missions are too fucking long. They could have trimmed that down. They could have reduced the number of areas in the game by a significant amount, like Hissing Wastes, Storm Coast, Forbidden Oasis. Could have all been removed from the game. Exalted Plains even. Remove all these zones from the game and the game's quality would not suffer one fucking bit at all. And also reduce the time on the war table stuff, and the game would be just perfectly fine. Increase the quality of the remaining zones. That's my personal thought. But as said, compelling protagonist. Very interested in seeing the Inquisitor in whatever story they have cooked up for the future. I hope he's the protagonist for the next Dragon Age game. Certainly voiced by competent voice actors. Hell, it was interesting playing Zevran. Yes, Zevran, the voice actor for Zevran from Dragon Age Origins is the guy who plays the Inquisitor, if you pick the American voice. That's surprising. I didn't really think he could pull it off as well as he did, but he managed it. Very good voice actor, very good story. And I like the fact that they had the balls to go and tackle a subject like religion. And not religion in some made-up fantasy bullshit, but no, something that's very similar to, say, the Catholic Church in the form of the Chantry. Not an allegory for the Catholic Church, more like a mirror. I'm using a Tolkien reference because Tolkien refused the allegory comments that a lot of people put on his story, and it instead said it's a mirror of the real world. And that's how I view the Chantry and the religious debates that are in the game versus what's in the real world. A mirror of the real world. This is not just my favorite game of 2014, this is my favorite BioWare game and one of the best RPGs that I've played. Would I say it's better than The Witcher 2 or Alpha Protocol, two other RPGs that I greatly enjoyed? That's a debate that I don't want to have, but I would certainly rank it high up there pretty much with those two games. And that says a lot because Dragon Age has had, well, I should say a storied history. The original Dragon Age game was not really that good. It was pretty mediocre overall, though it did have some of its good points, I feel. Whereas Dragon Age 2 was a complete and utter pile of shit. It's good to kill Hawk. It's really, really good to have the option to kill Hawk. For that alone, I would give it Game of the Year. Nah, I'm just fucking around with you. But, yeah. That might be hard to swallow to people who believe BioWare can't recover from their past mistakes. But my personal stance on the whole affair of BioWare has always been that I had hoped that they would recover. And they did in spectacular fashion. And they do deserve the Game of the Year awards that they've gotten. They do deserve the review scores. Even though, let's just say that I have problems with some of the things reviewers are saying of this game. But then again, people gave them a lot of flack over their Dragon Age 2 reviews, so they're now coming back with a vengeance, essentially. It's hard to take the piss on them when they're mostly right. Mostly. There's just some annoyances. It's like the most important game in our generation. No, really. I can say a lot of things about Inquisition, but it is not the most important game of our generation. It is not a game that redefines the expectations of an entire genre, which is something I could say for The Witcher 2. And in fact, I do see the influence of The Witcher 2 in terms of the Inquisition. So that's my list of favorite games and disappointing games and worst game of 2014. Costin here, signing out. Stay tuned for more, and if you like the support channel, my Patreon link is in the description below.